This was planned. There was malice. This is a person who came to this house with a deranged mind.
A brutal killing.
She was controlled.
His mission was to destroy both of them.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
This is a very personal murder.
He's going to be in charge. He's going to be in control and never be told no. You're dealing with someone who's a complete psychopath.
A stalker is like having your own personal terrorist assigned to you.
The truth will be revealed.
It was chilling that someone's out there that can do this kind of thing.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. East Cobb, an affluent suburb located just north of Atlanta.
It's a community that's really centered around families. It's known for having good schools, so people move there a lot for that reason. It's low crime, and it's considered a really safe area.
But days before Halloween, this quiet community is shocked by a real-life horror.
It came through as a 911 call. A little 5-year-old boy came home from school, and he was stabbed about 18 times in his chest. When you hear of a child who's injured by somebody, you're more with your foot through the firewall, driving as hard as fast as you can to get there.
As detectives arrive on scene, 5-year-old Nick Smith is rushed to the trauma center.
He was with a neighbor girl, Christina, who lived upstairs.
She said they saw a shadow pass by the door. Assuming it was his mother, Nick ran into the room where a person grabbed him from behind and began violently stabbing him in the chest. Christina wasn't able to really give us any identifying features. It was such a traumatic event for her, hearing the screams, that she literally ran out of the house.
What could this little 5-year-old, 60-pound boy have done to anybody to have deserved to have been stabbed repeatedly in the chest in such a violent situation?
Cobb County detectives Randy Harris, John Dawes, and major crimes prosecutor Jesse Evans begin investigating the vicious assault.
It was an older residence in an established neighborhood. You walk around the back side of the house, you see this sliding glass door that accesses the basement from the back. Is there a suspect still in the house? What else is going on? Has anybody else been injured? The two things that stood out the most were the broken knife blade, separated from its handle. That was the weapon covered in blood, obviously used in stabbing Nick. We were able to determine that that knife blade didn't match the cutlery that Carmen Smith had in her apartment. And in the bedroom, the carpet showed Nick's blood where he was initially stabbed. And in the bed was 5 layers of bedding. It didn't look right, so the officers pulled the bedding back on one side. And there lies the lifeless body of Nick's mom, Carmen Smith. It's heart-wrenching. to be involved in a case like this. And there's extra pressure and stress to try to find out who did it.
Police must uncover the details of the pair's final day.
Establishing the timeline as it relates to the victim and the last hours of that person's life, critical in any investigation. It generally opens the doors for the detectives first to understand the lifestyle of the deceased. And from that, you will draw the information to try to solve the crime.
Carmen was a beautiful, young, strawberry blonde.
She had a lot of friends and she was outgoing.
She's a loving mother. She absolutely devotes her time to her son, Nicholas. She's there for him. She takes care of him. She does everything that she can. Just a good mom. She's also a flight attendant. So she can be gone for a day or two or three at a time, depending on her schedule. She's a different victim because when she's home, she's with her kid. And when she's working, she's out of state flying. We want to know her routine. Did she go someplace where someone may have been checking her out?
They look to establish Carmen's time of death.
Nick got home at about 3 o'clock from school, and the rigor mortis, the lividity, Carmen clearly had been dead for a number of hours. Everything told us that her death had occurred in the morning.
That's significant. The assault on Nick didn't happen until much later, hours after she was killed and placed in the bed.
The time frame between taking Carmen's life and then assaulting Nick the way he was assaulted was just odd.
He intentionally waited on that child to come home because he could have left a long time earlier. So his mission was to destroy both of them.
You start by saying, who would want to do this to Carmen? Who would want to do this to Nick?
I'll be honest, I just couldn't think of a reason why a 5-year-old would be attacked.
Detectives work the crime scene and examine Carmen's injuries for clues to the identity of her attacker.
You collect anything and everything that could be evidence, blood or hair or any other forensic evidence, phone records. In that time, it took weeks, months to get the phone records. There were marks on her wrist, bruising, that were parallel lines, very consistent with handcuffs.
She had an abrasion to her chin. It was an abrasion consistent with sort of carpet burns, or having been face down as the ligature was pulled tight against her neck. In addition to that, she had 2 small puncture wounds to her back, which would not be lethal, certainly would have been painful. The puncture wounds to her back were consistent with having been caused by an ice pick type instrument. And there was an out-of-place cord, almost like a cord that you would use for pulling some blinds back, that was there on the scene.
It didn't match anything in the downstairs of this residence or even upstairs. It may have been the weapon that was used to strangle the life from Carmen Smith.
We're talking about really 4 different weapons at a minimum here. You've got the ligature, you've got the knife that was used to stab Nick, you've got an ice pick, and you've got handcuffs that were being used to effectuate this crime as well. The fact that you have more than one instrumentality involved in causing the injuries to Carmen was pretty significant.
It's not a crime of opportunity. This was planned. There was intent. There was malice. This is a person who came to this house with a deranged mind and accomplished what he came to do. The scene itself told us that there had been control. She was under the physical control of handcuffs and some kind of torture going on from behind.
When you see a form of torture, there's a level of rage in there. So it starts to narrow down. This wasn't someone who broke into the house to steal the vault.
It was chilling that someone's out there that can do this kind of thing.
Police attempt to speak with Nick, hoping for a description of his assailant.
The child was rolled out on the gurney, and I saw a massive amount of blood on his upper torso, and overheard an emergency room trauma doctor asking him what had happened. And what I heard at that time was, "Bad man hit me with a wok," in a child's language. And that was telling to me that this child is not even old enough to know what had happened to him.
This little kid, adorable little kid, laying on a hospital bed, just medical hardware all over him, trying to fight for life. Nick fought and fought and fought.
Most people that sustain that type of wound don't survive. Fortunately, none of the vital organs were penetrated. The child would be in and out of consciousness, and he was heavily medicated and was recovering. I was going to hang with the kid, regardless of everything else. I was able to kind of let him know, hey, I'm your friend. He needed someone. I tried to reassure him it was going to be okay. I asked him, did you see who attacked you? Do you know what color his clothing was, which he described as black? Could you see his face? And he replied that he was wearing a mask, and the mask was the same color, black. He said, I want my mommy. It was heart-wrenching.
They need to locate Nick's father.
Mike Smith was the ex-husband of Carmen.
There are always automatic thoughts for a detective. One is Carmen in the victimology, recently divorced. So you begin to look at the ex-husband.
You hear there's a divorce. You hear, well, there may be anger, there may be rage.
Detectives learn Nick was supposed to be at his dad's house all weekend, until his mom picked him up unexpectedly.
Mike kept Nicholas when Carmen was out of town. We learned that a couple of days before Carmen's death, she was working. And she wasn't feeling well and came home a day earlier than her schedule had provided. She wasn't supposed to be home.
This means her killer likely knew about her last-minute change in schedule.
Mike Smith knew that she came home a day early because he was angry that she interrupted with his visitation. In any divorce situation, especially where there's a minor, the parent who doesn't get as much time suddenly doesn't have their kid to look at and talk to and play with every day of the week. They're upset. It's just a volatile situation. Emotions get out of control, and some people can't control themselves. People knew that there had been frustrations, knew there had been arguments, knew that there had been a lot of problems because of the divorce.
But the fact is, he could walk through that door of the hospital, and if he was our violent suspect, then I needed to know that.
Detectives identify Mike Smith as a person of interest in the brutal murder of his ex-wife, Carmen.
The hospital started telling me that there were visitors being received, family members, friends. In a lot of cases, somebody that means you to do harm will come to the hospital and try to finish what they started.
They track Mike down, and after a brief interview at the station, he's brought to the hospital.
His emotions are obviously at a high point. The main thing that came to us was studying Mike, backgrounding Mike, sitting down and talking to Mike, looking at his face. He acknowledged accurately the relationship, the cause of the breakdown, and everything that had been going on.
Mike tells detectives he spoke to Carmen by phone at 7:30 a.m. that morning, right after Nick left for school.
The interview of the last person to speak to the deceased is very important. It starts to narrow down the time of death. You learn from the last person generally the state of mind of the deceased.
Mike admits they argued on the phone.
Mike Smith was angry that she came home early and grabbed up Nick. Mike was going through a lot of emotional issues.
They did have some jealousies going on with dating new people and that sort of thing.
The motivator with Mike always comes back to the same thing for me. Do I think that Mike had concerns that Carmen was seeing another man and there was some jealousy there? Yes. Do I think that Mike would have had concern about another man being involved in his son's life? Yes, absolutely.
His familiarity with their home is another factor.
A large component of the investigation was how somebody got into the house. When police officers respond to the scene, they don't find that there's any forced entry. There's not a door that's been kicked in. There's not a broken window or anything like that. This is clearly somebody that's found their way into this crime scene and done so in a stealthy manner. We learned Mike would oftentimes come to the house and stay with Nick when Carmen was absent due to her work schedule.
He knew the house. He knew the inside of the house. He knew the outside of the house.
So you've got motive and you've got opportunity, but you need something else because beyond a reasonable doubt is a very high standard. So the police have to nail down that suspect's alibi, because if they can't nail down an alibi, that opens a crack through which the defense will drive a truck.
Mike had an alibi with work, but there was still a part of that day when he could have gone over there and committed a crime and left.
Alibis are very difficult at times to disprove. Police officers often work on gut feelings. So when you have a gut feeling, you have to pursue it. You know your case. You are living it, you're breathing it.
Police need to find another way to rule Mike in or out.
Law enforcement intentionally allowed him to see Nick because they wanted to gauge the demeanor between the two of them. If it was your loved one and you realized that something this horrible had happened to them, you would expect that there's going to be an emotional reaction. When you don't see that appropriate demeanor, that's a red flag.
I gave them space and their privacy, but I moved to a window where I could observe. And when that child woke up and reached up for his dad, at that moment in time, I said, he's not a suspect. If his father had had anything to do with that, he certainly wouldn't have expressed that kind of comfort. His dad was in tears, he was in tears.
Mike had a lot of difficulty with the divorce, but did he stab his son 18 times? No, not a chance.
Detectives get word that forensic analysis of the crime scene has turned up a new clue.
There were short black hairs on her body. So there was obvious personal contact from a person who didn't match Carmen's strawberry blonde hair or little Nick's solid white hair.
If you have a hair with the follicle attached, there is sufficient DNA for testing. The difference between good DNA and bad DNA is quality and quantity. Quality means that you want to have well-preserved DNA. It's not going to be degraded. Quantity would be having a sufficient number of cells in order to amplify the genetic material.
But in 1995, DNA were 3 letters that nobody knew what it meant. So even with a root the skin tissue involved at the end of a hair, it just wasn't enough from a scientific standpoint.
On a mission to determine who the hair belongs to, police interview people who had access to Carmen's home, starting with Carmen's upstairs neighbor, Lottie Spencer.
Lottie moved in a few months prior to the murder. She worked in a doctor's office and had a 10-year-old daughter.
Christina was a few years older than Nick, but they rode the bus together and stayed in the same house, different portions of the house. Lottie and Carmen did have a unique setup in that they were both happened to be single moms living in this same house. There's really no evidence to show that they had any really close relationship or anything like that. It was more of a roommate type situation, one renting the top portion and one renting the bottom portion.
Lottie tells police she left for work that morning just after 7 a.m., the same time Nick and Christina left to meet the school bus.
She had heard from her daughter, Christina, what had happened and left work early to go to the house to check on her daughter.
Lottie then reveals that Carmen's death may be somehow connected to an unstable individual from her past.
Lottie was able to articulate for us a pretty terrifying series of events that have been going on for almost a full year in her life. Lottie and Wasim Daker met playing paintball on the same team with each other. So they started off kind of getting to know each other in a social context.
She said that she had initially reached out to him and tried to be a friend. She was trying to be like a big sister to him because he was confiding problems at home.
At the time, Daker was a 17-year-old student at Georgia Tech University.
He started to become obsessed with her. He was going to her office. He was following her around to restaurants.
Pretty soon, she wanted a more hands-off relationship with him. She was becoming more concerned about his bizarre behavior. So it got to a point where he just wouldn't take no for an answer.
After repeated requests to be left alone, Lottie went to the police.
He was charged with harassing phone calls. There was a stalking charge against him. He was ordered to undergo some psychiatric treatment.
In the fall of 1995, Lottie was starting a new life in East Cobb and moves in with Carmen Smith.
Lottie had just learned that Daker had been released from a hospital.
He was free to do whatever he wanted to. He's a stalker. And a stalker is like having your own personal terrorist assigned to you.
The discovery of a man stalking her upstairs neighbor dramatically shifts the focus of the Carmen Smith murder investigation.
Law enforcement focused very quickly on wanting to find out where he was and to talk to him about his situation and talk about what he had been doing. Eventually, police located him at his parents' house.
He's kind of a weird and awkward guy and troubled, it seemed, you know, from all indications, and yet very intelligent.
His statement was he didn't even know where Lottie lived, so he denied any involvement in the case.
Did you know about this woman?
I never even heard about it till you guys told me about it.
Did you kill Carmen Smith?
No.
Did you stab her son repeatedly with a knife?
No.
Daker tells a different story about his relationship with Lottie.
Lottie had always said that it was a platonic relationship. Mr. Daker claimed the opposite. He claimed that he had been in a romantic relationship with her for some period of time.
Well, Lottie's telling me one thing, you're telling me another. So I don't know who's telling the truth about how this relationship actually was going on.
She denies it completely, but we've had a complete sexual romantic relationship.
With these situations, the cases can be very difficult to prove because it's a he said, she said kind of situation.
Daker also claims he has an alibi for Carmen's murder.
He claimed that he was home all day, that he was playing computer games with friends. It was a game that required that you play over a modem, that you had to use a home phone.
I know I was home, and I was playing the set. Talk to Colin. I'm not worried.
When we did finally speak to his friend, yes, indeed, he said that he had been playing this game with Mr. Daker.
His alibi appears solid, and a fundamental question still remains.
Why Carmen Smith? What's his motive to cause any injury or the death of Carmen Smith? Everything that we looked at in the case told us that Carmen and Daker probably wouldn't know each other if they saw each other on the street.
Detectives turn their attention to other men in Carmen's life.
We talked to family members about her lifestyle and people that she was seeing, people she had dated before. Carmen had just turned 30 years old, a very beautiful young lady. The police wanted to find out a little bit more about their background to see if they could have been a person capable of doing this to her.
They learn about one individual Carmen had been spending a lot of time with lately.
John was in communication with her. I believe he knew about her flight that weekend.
John lived not too far away. He knew her routines, her schedules.
He knew where she lived.
John is brought to the station for questioning.
When you interview someone, you're looking for a number of tells. Body language is just one of them, and it's a very small part. There's certain very basic defensive positions people take when they are not sure, when they feel threatened by the question. The crossing of the legs, the crossing of the arms. Will they look you in the eye when they're talking to you?
When John was interviewed, he acknowledged his attraction to Carmen Smith. He acknowledged that they had been out. He talked about Carmen had confided in him. Carmen hadn't been divorced that long, and guys are stupid. We are what we are. So could there have been some jealousy that maybe she was seeing somebody else? Yeah.
Detectives need to uncover exactly where John was the morning Carmen was attacked.
The alibi that he provided wasn't anything that really could be substantiated because he was alone. So that makes it difficult. You can't say, okay, this person's here, they're clocked in at work, other people saw them, or they're shopping and they have a receipt, or there wasn't anything like that available. So the lack of alibi was a concern.
Without a clear alibi, it becomes a question of motive.
This was not a chance murder. This was not a quick murder. This was a very deliberate act.
There was nothing about him that would suggest that he was controlling and possessive and would be angry about anything that was going on in her life. Again, there was, do you like somebody? Yeah. Do you want them to see somebody else? No. Would you kill him over it? No. He's not that kind of guy. It was pursued, it was looked at, and in the course of all that, it dropped out.
For detectives, this means a disturbed killer is still walking the streets of East Cobb.
On violent crimes, you certainly want to find who's responsible and get them locked down.
If you talk to most law enforcement professionals involved in working homicides, most of them would probably tell you that they expect that they're going to be able to solve their case quickly and be able to make sure that you can bring justice to your victim and make sure that the general public is protected from future crimes. One of the frustrating parts, though, is you don't have that crystal ball at the time to know whether this is a case that's going to go cold. I want to, as a personal matter and professional matter, make sure that I've done everything that I can to bring justice to Nick and to bring justice to Carmen.
I remember the stress and I remember the focus in the office. This is it. You live it, you breathe it, you eat it, you sleep it or don't sleep it. I don't sleep much. It's an overwhelming burden. You have to do everything. And in order to do that, you have to live that case. That victim is mine. Carmen and Nicholas Smith are mine.
After weeks of waiting, they receive a key piece of evidence.
Probably one of the first times that law enforcement had obtained phone records in a case like this.
Remember, in 1995, it was a very difficult task to figure out whose number was called.
Within the massive paper trail lies a shocking clue.
There were calls made from inside the home that day.
One call was placed from the downstairs portion of the house, Carmen's portion of the house, upstairs to Lottie's portion of the house. And the records clearly showed to us that this call was placed after she had been murdered.
Records show a call was made from Carmen's phone to the upstairs neighbor in the hours following her murder.
Because we knew the time of death was in the morning, this was a pretty significant piece of evidence.
Police believe the call, which came in at 11:32 a.m., suggests the killer must have had a connection with someone upstairs.
When you're looking at a piece of evidence, your gut leads you often to the right conclusion. All you do is follow the evidence, follow the phone calls.
We've got a guy, a documented stalker.
We really needed to take another look at this guy, Mr. Daker. No other perpetrator in the world would take the time to not only remain in a crime scene, but to be so obsessed with the person upstairs that they're gonna make that phone call. He already demonstrated that he is incapable of controlling himself in terms of the harassment and intimidation. He had continued to stalk Lottie, continued to contact her against her will.
Believing Daker poses a threat, detectives act swiftly.
It became clear that law enforcement could prove several counts of aggravated stalking here in Cobb County. A decision was made to arrest him for those counts against Lottie in the hope that they could further their investigation.
There was never a, we can't get him for this, so let's get him for this. The aggravated stalking was an obvious crime, and it's a dangerous crime.
He was brought to the police station. He continued to deny knowing Carmen.
As part of his arrest, Daker provides blood and tissue samples. Police also execute a search warrant of his home.
You can't crawl inside somebody's mind and see what they were thinking at the time they committed these very horrible acts. But you can sort of get a glimpse of it by understanding what their lifestyle's like and what they were involved in. In his house, there were thousands of images of pornography that were found on a laptop. A lot of the images involved binding up and torturing women, which matched almost identically to the type of crime that we were dealing with. We found some email correspondence in his inbox where he had apparently asked for books about some really terrifying things. How to break into houses, how to kill people without joy. One of the books in particular talked about how you could effectively use an ice pick as a weapon to control your victim. We did find ice picks that he used routinely to clean his paintball guns, and some knives that were the same brand as the broken knife blade that was left at the crime scene. So he had access to the type of weapons that were clearly used on Carmen.
In the search of Wasim's room, there was a safe. When I was 17 years old, I didn't have a safe because my mom wouldn't let me hide anything. But there's a safe. And when it was open, there's a handcuff box, and it's empty. Where are the handcuffs?
The most telling evidence is found discarded in his room.
A couple of letters that were found in a trash can. He was writing about his thoughts about Lottie, one of which was particularly chilling. It was ripped up, where he closed the letter by basically saying that he had a foolproof plan to get back at Lottie, but that he was going to somehow let her live.
My impression is that he wanted to cause Loretta Spencer Bites more pain than she could tolerate without putting physical pain on her.
You start to understand that this might be a case of displacement, where an offender is clearly taking out his anger against one person and using it against somebody else.
On September 19, 1996, Daker is found guilty of stalking Loretta Spencer.
He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The investigation never stopped into the murder of Carmen Smith and the assault on Nicholas. Every step of this case, every piece of evidence, every thought, every circumstance went right back to Wasim Daker.
We never quit. These cases are not wasting away in some old file cabinet. These are always fresh on our minds.
But in 2005, Wasim Daker is nearing the end of his prison sentence for the aggravated stalking.
Make no mistake about it, Mr. Daker is not your average criminal. He is an extremely intelligent individual, and that makes him that much more dangerous.
He's not going to be told no by a judge or a doctor or anybody else. He's going to do whatever the hell Wasim Daker wants to do.
You certainly want to keep that individual off the street. There's always a sense of urgency, and we're going to bring you to justice.
Police are convinced Wasim Daker is the man responsible for the murder of Carmen Smith and the brutal assault of her young son. Now, they have to prove it.
He's a dangerous individual. Once he was released from prison, he's going right back to Lottie.
So he was released in 2005. He was out amongst us.
There's extra pressure and stress to try to grab him up. Our best evidence in this case was hair evidence that we hadn't been able to do anything with.
It was crucial where this evidence was located. It wasn't just found at some area of the crime scene. It was literally recovered from the body of Carmen Smith underneath her shirt.
By 2009, DNA testing has dramatically improved.
Some of the hair evidence that was preserved on the slides from 1995 had biological material, root. We sent those hairs to a private company in Texas so that they could obtain a profile.
Detective John Dawes delivers the sample personally.
It was quite a day leaving Atlanta before daylight, maintaining the evidence with me in a hotel room that night, knowing the importance of it and the value of it. And it worked. December 31st of 2009, I got a call from the scientist that it was Wasim Daker. And the percentages that it might have been a duplicate profile of his DNA were so ridiculous. There aren't that many people in the world.
Between this evidence and the phone call made from inside the apartment, detectives know Daker's original alibi was manufactured.
We have overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Now we have DNA. Let's go.
Using the reconstructed timeline, they can now prove he's the killer.
He waited until the children got on the school bus. He waited till Lottie went to work.
He entered the home at some time in the morning.
He knew how to avoid detection.
We know that at some point she was placed in handcuffs. We know that he stabbed her in the back with an ice pick. There were deep ligature marks that were left on her neck, clearly showing that she died of ligature strangulation.
He went there to commit a heinous assault. He's absolutely a conscienceless, unremorseful killer. And then to sit with her dead body for hours, relishing in what he's accomplished, to the point that the 5-year-old son comes home. And to grab him around the neck and stab him repeatedly in the chest.
On September 13th, 2012, Wasim Daker, acting as his own lawyer, pleads not guilty.
Nick testified that he took his mother from him and that he was always going to have Wasim's rage stamped on his chest, basically, in the form of those stab wounds.
Nick grew out of being a victim right there that day on the stand in the trial of his mom's murder and his assault.
It was just a pit in your stomach, praying that the jury was going to see it the same way that we did.
After a 2-week trial, it takes the jury just 4 hours to reach their decision.
The guilty verdict was a huge relief. It was a relief to my team. It was a relief to John Dawes, and to be able to look Nick in the eyes and be able to confirm for him that we had finally done what we hadn't been able to do for so terribly long, which is to not only hold the person accountable that took his mother away from him, but to hold the person accountable that had dramatically impacted his life.
That is the best thing that I'll ever receive from a case that we got through.
Wasim Daker is sentenced to life in prison, plus 47 years. His latest appeal was denied in 2016 by the Georgia Supreme Court.
This case was an honor and a privilege to be a part of. It was sheer effort, but the best of some of the hardest working people that you've ever seen.
And I believe that's our role as homicide investigators, is to speak for the dead, because, you know, damn it, there's a story to be told. And just because you took somebody's life doesn't mean we're not going to tell it.
She was so nice and so open-hearted and generous that these monsters took advantage of that.
A brutal killing.
There was blood spattered all over the walls, floor, bed, everywhere.
Identifying her body was one of the most difficult things that I've had to do in my life.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
He was stalking her. He would not leave her alone. He was constantly calling her.
You have another woman involved, maybe seeking revenge.
He was an absolute animal who now, I hope, burns in the hottest part of hell.
The truth will be revealed.
You know, he kind of had a smile on his face, and he called it the perfect murder.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Clinton, Louisiana. A tiny town just north of Baton Rouge. Home to less than 2,000 residents.
Clinton has a reputation for being a very comfortable, very safe, small town.
It's really a quiet parish with a low crime rate.
It has a small downtown, but once you leave the town limits, it's pretty much a rural area.
On the morning of June 26, a woman co-workers called and asked that we go check on her.
The woman is 42-year-old Janora Guillory.
They were just concerned because normally she kept in constant contact with them.
When our first deputy arrived at the house, the side door by the carport was partially opened and had a dog tied up under the steps. Once he made entry into the house, when he walked around the corner, he looked in the room, and that's where he found Miss Guillory covered with blood and on the floor.
The room was in total disarray. Lamp had been shattered. There were what appeared to be bullet holes in the window. There was blood spattered all over the walls, floor, bed, everywhere. She had a nightshirt or a nightgown that was pushed up. It was a scene of gruesome violence.
The job of finding Janora's killer falls to sheriff's investigator, Don McKee.
This case was really my first homicide to work, and the scene was really bad. Miss Guillory died from the beating. She'd also been shot several times, and she had also been stabbed several times. You just have to do your job and try to put it to the side.
His first task is to notify Janora's family.
Disbelief was my reaction when I heard. When we arrived, we had to face the crime scene. Her father and brother remained outside of the home. I went in and ultimately had to identify the body for the family. It was one of the most difficult things that I've had to do in my life. If you walk into a room, you see someone and you can recognize them within a millisecond. I had to spend about 3 minutes, 4 minutes comparing things like her lips and the finger structure. And by taking little bits and pieces like that, only then could I make a definite identification. Janora was a very intelligent, very attractive woman, very, very full of life. She was an administrator for a major insurance company. She worked very hard, enjoyed living in the country, and she remained true to those country roots all of her life.
You never heard anything bad about Miss Janora. What we learned is she would help anyone that needed help and do whatever she could for people, and she was just a caring person.
She just couldn't say no to human or animal. I think Genora just couldn't pass up an animal that needed help. That's why she ended up with, 20 or 25 dogs and a giant kennel on her property. That's why she ended up with, horses.
Many of her animals were strays, particularly the dogs and cats. She purchased the horses, enjoyed riding and enjoyed being just around those horses.
In order to find the killer, Detective McKee begins the difficult task of reconstructing the last 24 hours of Genora Guillory's life.
When you're building timelines, you have a very open mind. A timeline can be filled in by almost any kind of information. You don't know how far back you have to go until you find somebody to fill the puzzle in.
The only timeline we had was when she left work early that Friday to come home. Her co-worker advised us that she did leave early that Friday. It was shortly after noon. The autopsy shows that the homicide could have happened anywhere from noon on Saturday to noon on Sunday.
With a wide window of time for her murder, Detective McKee looks to the scene for clues that may lead him to the killer.
There's blood by the drawer where the knives were. There's blood on the counter. I think at one time she tried to get a knife or something to defend herself with. The pattern from the side door showed spots of blood to where she ran towards the front door. There was keys in the front door. It was a deadbolt lock. There was blood on them keys that indicated she was trying to get out of that door, that she was trying to run away. Her phone was knocked off the hook. There was blood on the wall there.
Despite the violence, there is no physical or forensic evidence pointing to a potential suspect.
There was a gun involved, there was a knife, and some type of blunt object. And none of those were found on the scene, so the perpetrator took them away with them. The fact that no murder weapons were left on the scene means that the perpetrator at least had the presence of mind to try and cover their tracks.
There was no forced entry, so she had to open the door. The dog was tied up, and we learned real quick that that would have never happened with Miss Guillory.
It appeared that someone had secured that dog while they made entry into the house.
The indications that we got was basically that she was killed by someone she knew.
Police begin to canvass the area to see if anyone saw or heard anything during the window in which Genora was killed.
Miss Guillory had very few neighbors right in the area, and the closest neighbor was across the street from her, and that turned out to be the Skippers.
Amy and Philip Skipper live with their newborn and a young man they had taken in.
Philip Skipper was the guardian or sort of de facto stepfather to a teenage boy named John Ballio. The Skippers and John Ballio were very cooperative. Philip Skipper said that he and John Ballio had been helping a neighbor move on Saturday and didn't arrive home until late that night. Philip said that he, his wife, and child were at the Skipper's trailer across the street after that, and they didn't hear anything.
Amy was emotionally destroyed, talking about how well Miss Guillory had treated them and how much Miss Genora had done for them and helped them out.
The relationship between Genora Guillory and the Skippers was close. They saw each other all the time, and Genora did whatever she could to help them out because they were poor. They initially lived in this really dilapidated trailer. She helped them get a newer one. She sometimes bought things for them, especially for their baby, diapers, some baby food, formula. She even decided to go ahead and name her good friends across the street as the beneficiaries of a life insurance policy.
They would also, in return, do things for Miss Guillory that when she would have to go out of town for her job, they would take care of the animals.
She gave them money. They cleaned her house. They were in constant communication all the time.
During their interview with the Skippers, they never could come up with anybody to lead us to anybody that would do anything to Miss Genore. They advised that she very seldom had company, so they was unable to give us any names or anywheres to look for a suspect.
Despite their willingness to talk, something seems off.
Philip Skipper was just overwhelmingly trying to assist the family. He talked good about Miss Genore, but then he would constantly go to, I'll clean it up, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll take care of the dogs, I'll take care of the animals. I've never seen somebody that was willing to help as much as Philip was. I felt that they knew something.
Detective McKee observes something that needs explaining.
We'd noticed some scratches on his arm. He said that him and his stepson were wrestling in the yard. And John did have scratches on his arms also, and his story was the same as Philip's story, which was really suspicious to me.
So they need to look at the neighbors and see if they're actually involved in it.
Bloody scratches on the arms of two of Genora Guillory's neighbors has police questioning if they were involved in her murder.
In a case like this, in which the victim struggles with the assailant, it would not be unusual that there be some blood from the victim scratching the assailant.
When pressed for an explanation, Philip makes an unusual admission.
He said that Miss Guillory had argued with the Skippers due to the fact that a dog had killed one of the Skippers' goats. And they was blaming it on Miss Genore's dog. And Miss Genore was sure it was not her dog. She had told the Skippers that they was no longer welcome to come to her house, that she would stay to herself, they needed to stay to themselves.
The argument took place just 1 month prior to her death.
Tension between neighbors, that's always kind of a red flag that goes up. But you need something in a murder, you know. Why would you do it? You need a motive, an opportunity. They had an opportunity, they were right across the street. They had a semi-motive that was a tension. But it's kind of like cutting the arm that feeds you. You know, she was helping them a lot. You know, why murder her?
They ask both Philip and his stepson, John, to take a polygraph.
In some cases, when you're investigating murders, you will use a polygraph as an investigative aid. It is to send messages to the person. You don't believe them. Why would you ask them to take a polygraph otherwise?
My advice to anybody who's asked to take a polygraph is say, sure, I'll take it. If you're an innocent person, the police are going to say, well, you're no longer a suspect, so take the polygraph.
Both Philip and John Ballio had no problem with taking a polygraph. The questions related to the case were, did you kill Miss Genore Guillory? Did you stab or shoot Genore? Can you take us to the gun that was used to kill Miss Genore? Both Philip and John Ballio passed. Once they passed, we had no other evidence to pin them to the murder.
Detectives need to find who Genora might have been in contact with. in her last 24 hours. Her co-workers provide the name of a recent boyfriend, Tommy Alexander.
Basically, they met through horses. Genora owned horses, Tommy Alexander owned horses. They met at the feed store in the nearby town. They started dating. They dated a little while. Then that ended when Genora found out that Tommy Alexander had another girlfriend. That opens up all kind of possibilities. I mean, you have another woman involved. Maybe Tommy would be mad about something. Maybe the other woman would be seeking revenge.
It's a crime of passion. People act without thinking. If you can show me a love triangle, I'll tell you have a potential homicide on your hands.
They bring Tommy Alexander in.
Tommy, when talking to him, he was calm. He was saddened by Miss Genora's death. He was saying how good of a person she was, just like everybody else we had talking to had said.
They question him about his most recent interaction with Genora.
Tommy Alexander told the detectives that he had spoken to Genora on Wednesday. They had seen each other. One was transferring horses to another. There were some papers to sign. So that was the last time he spoke to her, was on Friday.
Police must confirm his whereabouts during the time in which Genora was killed.
He had an alibi. He said he had been home all weekend with his girlfriend, which turned out to be true. She backed him up on that story. They were able to eliminate him in the investigation as a possible suspect.
He was really upset. Nothing to raise an eyebrow to think that he was involved in the homicide. Based on his story and the lack of evidence we had, we really had to start looking other places.
So it was going back, did she have anything out of the ordinary happening in her life?
Looking for answers, they turned to Genora's phone records.
We had a phone call that would have matched the last day that Miss Genora was alive. We traced it, we tracked it. It was associated with someone named Steve Williams.
The call was placed at 8:27 a.m. that Saturday, potentially making Williams the last person to speak to Genora alive.
Steve Williams was a Baton Rouge police officer. He pestered her at work to the point where she eventually agreed to go on a date with him. When she got back, she told her coworkers that she never wanted to see him again. She said he was too free with his hands. He kept grabbing her and touching her, and she didn't really want to see him anymore. At the time all this was going on, Steve Williams was actually married. He and his wife had a child, but apparently that didn't stop his romantic pursuits in other areas.
Genora's friends say he was relentless.
We were told that Steve Williams basically was stalking her, was real aggressive towards Miss Genora. Steve had been coming to her work in Baton Rouge and had actually made everybody in the building feel uncomfortable about the way he would show up to meet Genora when she would get off from work, show up at lunchtime. He was really aggressive towards Genora, trying to get her into a relationship with him.
The thing about stalking is there is an obsession, and he's demonstrating that with multiple phone calls, showing up just unexpectedly. So if he's obsessed with her, he may not be satisfied with the level of attention that he's getting from her, and he may progress that to aggression.
That was a huge red flag for the investigators. I mean, when you have a domestic situation like that, it really puts them on high alert. So they really began to focus on Steve Williams. You know, you have a sort of a jilted boyfriend who keeps bothering her, who keeps wanting to come by and see her. And all of a sudden, he's going to come by whether she wants it or not, and then she's never seen again.
Baton Rouge police officer Steve Williams, who once dated homicide victim Genora Guillory, is now the lead suspect in her murder.
Police officers don't like investigating other police officers. Something you want to shy away from. You know, they don't like to think that another cop would be involved in some kind of criminal activity. But cops generally have a very intimate knowledge of, you know, law enforcement and how crimes are committed. So a police officer can be a more wary suspect because you would presume that he or she knows what not to do, what evidence to make sure it doesn't get left. So they make sort of dangerous criminals. They're so knowledgeable about the investigative process itself.
His potential involvement comes down to the call he made to her the day she died.
When the detectives questioned Steve Williams, you know, of course, he denied having anything to do with Genora's death. He said that they were friends, and he resented the fact that he was characterized as sort of a stalker. He said that he did call her a few times a week, but, you know, just to do some friendly chit-chatting.
They narrow in on the one call they're interested in.
Steve admitted to calling her Saturday.
He said that although he did call her, he was going to come by Saturday, he never made it. So the detectives were sort of left with, you know, is this guy telling the truth? He very well may have been the last person, you know, to see her alive. I mean, he could be the killer.
Police learn of another call between Steve and Genora, witnessed by her colleagues.
So the Friday before Genora was killed, Steve Williams called her at work. Her co-workers said they engaged in an argument on the telephone, and then she left work. So, you know, whether that argument played into her leaving work early or it was strictly just to go do some chores around her house, you know, nobody really knows. But there was a verbal altercation on the phone, and then later Steve Williams says that he was going to come by. So, you know, from the investigator standpoint, you know, this is looking more and more like he's the #1 suspect in her murder.
They interview his co-workers and discover a disturbing trend.
Steve Williams had a reputation, a history of this sort of overly aggressive pursuit of whatever love interest he had. In the Baton Rouge Police Academy, there was a female recruit who made the complaint against him.
We interviewed his co-worker, and she was able to give us some information about how Steve Williams acted towards her.
She said he kept harassing her, would call her at home, off duty, about academy class type business, but she was in a relationship with somebody and she didn't want him making these late night calls.
Based on the information we got about Steve Williams going after her, it was basically the same way that he went after Miss Genora. So it showed a pattern of aggressiveness and jealousy.
We look at the past to look to the future. People are creatures of habit. So it's an indicator. It's patterns of behavior and tells, in and of himself, is not evidence. But as a trained investigator, you're looking for that because that will lead you to ask certain questions.
So he had a reputation for this kind of behavior. And of course, the police have to look at this and say, well, this time did it go even a step further? Did he kill her?
Believing Steve Williams had both motive and opportunity, they bring him in again, this time for a polygraph.
Anytime you investigate a police officer, you got to be careful because you don't know their state of mind. You're telling this man that his career as a police officer is about to come to an end because he's suspected in a murder. He didn't do good on his polygraph.
His results indicated that he was lying about one or more things in his answers.
And that's when he advised us that he was not going to talk to us anymore without a lawyer. So we obtained a search warrant and went to his residence. We actually seized his police car and had it towed to the crime lab for processing. What we was hoping to find was a murder weapon or some bloody clothes or any other type of evidence that might help us in the investigation. But unfortunately, we came up with no weapon that would have matched what we was looking for.
A drop of Janora Guillory's blood in Steve Williams's car or house would have convicted him. I mean, there's really no other excuse for that.
I really thought that Steve Williams was the man I was after. Just did not have enough to do anything with.
All you have is odd circumstances, him making a phone call, leaving a message, him sort of harassing her at work, but, you know, none of that's a crime, and they couldn't charge him.
That's really when the case came to a complete stop. We just had nowhere else we could follow up to.
Not every homicide case can be solved or will be solved. We have to be realistic. You do as much as you can to the best of your ability. You will get frustrated.
In this case, they talked to the co-workers, they talked to the neighbors, they talked to everybody that they could find, but they didn't have any physical evidence or a real motive.
I was getting aggravated because I wanted to solve it, and I done told Mr. Guillory that we was gonna solve it. And there's nothing I could tell the family, except for we're working on it. We're waiting for a break.
Janora's death took a tremendous toll on her family. Illnesses, divorce, directly resulted from this murder. But this matter never went cold for Investigator Mackey. We trusted Mr. Mackey tremendously. We knew that Mackey was doing a great job.
Over a year after Janora's death, police receive a call that sets the investigation back into motion.
The detectives got a tip from another jurisdiction. They went over to interview this alleged witness, a guy named Donnie Fisher.
Initially, what indicated to the police officers that Donnie Fisher may know something about a homicide in East Feliciana Parish.
He had given some details of the murder. I knew exactly what murder he was talking about. When interviewing Donnie, he at first didn't want to cooperate. What I done was I laid pictures of the crime scene and got on to him and said, this woman did not deserve this. She was a good woman. After I showed him that, he told us what was told to him.
He was friends with Philip Skipper and John Ballio.
Fisher says Janora's neighbors took him to her house after the murder.
Donnie Fisher told us then Miss Janora's family paid them to clean up the house.
Philip Skipper told me, what would I think if I killed Guillory? And I kind of took it as a joke at first.
And what did he tell you?
You know, he kind of had a smile on his face, and you know, I knew. He didn't have to just come out and say it. I knew in my mind. He called it the perfect murder.
And then he said that John Ballio had taken him into the house and told him step by step how they killed Miss G.
When he was taking you to the house, what was he saying?
He was saying where the blood was. He was telling me everything.
If Fisher is telling the truth, this means Skipper and Ballio lied about where they were the night she died.
Fisher started giving details of the murder that he would not have knowledge of.
And one of them held the dog back, knocked on the door, hit her with a baseball bat, knocked the teeth out, cut her up, shot her in the head.
Donnie Fisher implicated Philip Skipper, Johnny Hoyt, Lisa Hoyt, and John Ballio.
This information adds 2 new names to the investigation: Philip's sister, Lisa Hoyt, and her husband, Johnny.
That's the first time we heard of Johnny Hoyt's name was when we interviewed Donnie Fisher.
Johnny Hoyt was kind of a stocky guy. He was kind of a bigger built, muscular type guy.
So you have this little tight group of people here, and the statement from Donnie Fisher implicated them all in the murder.
Donnie continues, telling police of Philip's admissions.
Did he say who cut?
He didn't say, he just said we.
Did he say who shot?
He just said we. It was a gang. It's not, they're like one people, okay? He said it's a thrill. That's what he told me. It was a thrill. He says it's the best feeling he'll ever have.
The story that he told, it was no doubt in my mind that we was going after the right people this time.
But without any physical evidence, they need to find another way to prove beyond a doubt that the 4 people Fisher has named are responsible for the murder.
You play on what feelings of remorse they might have. You want to get them to confess. And they don't have to confess, of course. They can just ask for a lawyer and the whole thing's over.
Brought into custody, Philip Skipper, Lisa Hoyt, and Johnny Hoyt all refused to cooperate.
John Ballio was the last person that we was able to talk to. It was a long interview. It was a couple hours probably. And finally he just broke.
Philip and Lisa, me and Johnny, we was going over there to see Miss G. They wanted me to watch them kill Miss G and hold the dog.
Did they say why they wanted you to watch?
It would be my true test of brotherhood.
A year after the murder of Janora Guillory, police have damning testimony from a 15-year-old who was witness to the crime.
John Ballio basically told us it was part of my initiation to get into the brotherhood, was to go and participate and watch them kill Miss G. The brotherhood was a white supremacist group. It was a hate group, is what it was.
And the initials for the Brotherhood was GFBD. God forgives, the Brotherhood doesn't. And, you know, as with all gangs, they're created to intimidate, to scare people.
All right, what happens? When we got there, Lisa walked up to the door and knocked on it and told Ms. G that she needed some money to get the baby some diapers. And when she did that, Johnny punched Miss G. The first time she got stabbed, Lisa stabbed her. And then Johnny stabbed her, and Philip. They all took turns.
When did they shoot her? Before they stabbed her or after they stabbed her?
Before they stabbed her, they was making me watch, saying that it would show if I was a true brother or not, or whether or not I could keep my mouth shut.
Ballio explains this wasn't the only motivation.
He said Miss Guillory had a life insurance policy that was signed over to Philip Skipper and Amy Skipper.
The growing fight over the goat and the dog incident made Philip Skipper realize she's going to change the beneficiary on that policy or just outright cancel it, and we need to get over there and kill her so that we benefit from that policy. Two people who live in a trailer out in the middle of the woods, $25,000 was pretty significant. I think race and money played kind of equal parts. If Janora Guillory had been a white woman, I doubt they would have killed her.
I think John finally broke because he did feel bad about what happened. I think he realized what he had done was wrong.
I thought it was pretty sick myself. I was crying, but I was also just trying to shut up so they wouldn't get worried about me telling them. Because they said if I ever said anything, they'd kill me.
Armed with Ballio's confession and a complete understanding of the timeline, detectives now have enough to press charges against the 4 conspirators.
Miss Guillory left work that Friday to come home. Saturday, Philip Skipper, Lisa, and Johnny Hart, they had been popping pills, drinking all day long.
They determined that they wanted to go over there and initiate John Ballio into the Brotherhood.
Midnight, 1 o'clock, they all go over there. Lisa knocked on the door. When Miss Guillory came to the door, Johnny Hart punched her. They chased her in the bedroom. That's when they took turns shooting her, stabbing her, and then beating her with the bat. After they killed her, they went back to their house. They burned their clothes and shoes. Gun used, they said they threw it off in the river.
The district attorney charges all 4 suspects with murder.
Lisa Hoyt pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Philip Skipper went to trial, was found guilty. 2nd-degree murder, he got life in prison. Johnny Hart also went to trial and was found guilty and is serving life in prison.
John Ballio cooperated. He was a juvenile when this occurred, and he pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to juvenile life.
Janora was so nice and so open-hearted and generous that these monsters took advantage of that.
It is a dumb dog that bites the hand that feeds it. And Philip Skipper was a dumb dog, a swine, an absolute animal, who now, I hope, burns in the hottest part of hell.
I feel a lot better now on this case that we've done our best. The DA done his job, and we got justice for the family. And I feel that the family's happy, so if they're happy, I'm happy.
We work for their families. I just want to make them sleep better at night. You know, they need to put this behind them.
And I would not want us to forget the life, the lively, happy, smiling, beautiful person that Janora was.
You could apply just about every one of the 7 deadly sins to this homicide. Greed, lust, envy, anger.
A brutal killing.
The first thing that came to my mind was ambush. Someone waited for him and shot him.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
We had suspicion that there may have been an affair.
There was an actual fight between the two of them. He said, "There's this guy I know that wants him killed."
The truth will be revealed.
He started crying and said, "Yeah, I'll tell you everything."
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Maryville, Indiana, a thriving community just southeast of Chicago.
We have a little bit of everything. We have a large residential area. We have a large business district. It's one of the largest towns in the state of Indiana.
On average, we're usually in the single digits for homicides. We were leading up to a holiday weekend. This was the day before Good Friday, when we received a 911 call. Initially, dispatch said that there were shots fired and that there was a man down.
The victim is 33-year-old John Parker.
John had a vacuum cleaner, door-to-door sales business. He was an amazing salesman. He was hardworking, and he was successful.
He's rolling along one high to the next, and this terrible thing happened to him.
Detectives Donald Toth, Robert Wiley, and Jeff Rice are given the task of hunting down the cold-blooded killer responsible for John's murder.
When I arrived, what I saw was John Parker laying on the ground outside of his vehicle, directly in front of their business office.
John was struck once. The bullet entered lower behind the ear to the back of his head.
The crime scene itself was what I would call fairly pristine. In other words, there wasn't a lot of evidence to be had there.
There were no signs of struggle. There were no signs of a fight. Initially, the first thing that came to my mind was ambush. Someone came up from behind and shot him, and he very likely never had a chance to see or hear what was going on.
From the very beginning, we knew that this one was going to be difficult.
Detectives turn their attention to reconstructing the last 24 hours of John Parker's life.
The timeline of the victim, where they were and what they were doing, is crucial to any good investigation. And when we look at the people involved, be they suspects or witnesses, finding where they are when this occurred is very important. The only witnesses that we located when we got there were Ben Love, the office manager, and Judy Parker.
Judy was crying. She was obviously upset, which we understood as the wife of the deceased. She said that that night, probably at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, John and Judy had gone out to dinner at a local restaurant.
My daughter calls me and said, you know, take me to homework and I need to get it done. Well, yeah, I said, I got it at the office. So I was stuck. I didn't pick it up for a park on the way home.
They finished their dinner. They went back to the business after the restaurant.
Both of you walking together? We walked in together.
Are you walking in together?
And Ben was asking us, well, can I just go home? John's like, no.
Just so.
Yeah, I'm out of here. And when I got in the car, sat down, and I looked up, and I seen John coming out of the office.
Saw him through the window?
I saw him through the window. That's when I reached down to get my cell phone out of my purse. And then John came, and I seen him coming, so I looked up, and he passed the door. And he opened the passenger door, and he says, well, I'm getting this food for Ben. And okay, that's fine. And that's when I turned back around. And then all of a sudden I hear, and I see somebody go in. I see a figure. And I get out of the car. I see him laying there. And I stood there for a second and I went to John, touched him. I said, John. And I went back in the office. And I opened the door and I go, Ben. I go, Ben, call the police now. Call the police.
Judy really gave us nothing other than this mystery man dressed in dark clothing that she only caught a glimpse of.
Generic? Yes. But that's your starting point.
They shift their focus to the office manager.
When we talked to Ben, Ben's emotional state was that of just being completely stunned. Ben said that when John left, he went to the bathroom, and then when he came out of the bathroom, Judy was inside the business and said that John had been shot. He said that from the bathroom, he didn't hear any sounds. And since he was in the bathroom the whole time, there was nothing Ben could give us
Although Judy and Ben are unable to provide anything concrete, police still manage to develop a theory.
His Rolex watch and his big gold ring were on his hand. No one went after Judy's purse. Also, it's our industrial area, and it is somewhat secluded.
The opportunity to rob somebody is nil. So it just didn't seem like a random event. It seemed something more personal. And we asked Judy if there was any enemies.
Who do you think would have done this? You could have, not even would, I mean, in your heart of hearts.
Yeah, I have no idea.
One of the first steps was to do our victimology on John. We wanted to see who he was, what he was about. John made his first million when he was in Michigan, before he was 35 years old.
He was able to build this vacuum cleaner franchise into considerable wealth.
And it shows his work ethic and his drive. He knew what he wanted, and he knew where he wanted to be in life. Judy worked for John in Michigan. John fell for her right after meeting her. He was just smitten. Judy had 2 children from a previous marriage, Christina Hicks and Danny Hicks. I believe Christina was 16 or 17, and Danny was about 15 years old. John had picked up the family and moved them down here and renamed the company J&J Industries to be John and Judy Industries.
When investigators are looking into a businessman that was murdered in front of the business, obviously you want to get a little bit of insight on how he conducted business. Did he have a bad business deal? Did he owe someone money?
Here we have a victim who, from a relatively young age, became a multimillionaire. To move that fast in his business, he likely stepped on a lot of people. And whether that fits into the motive for the death, these are all items you have to look at.
Since we had already talked to Judy, who was the last person with him, we wanted to talk to his brother to see what had been going on in case something had happened to spur this ambush. David was very angry and very upset when we met him. He began immediately talking about an altercation that John had had with an ex-employee about a week or so prior to the homicide. The employee's name was Quentin House, and apparently there had been a dust-up in the parking lot between John and Quentin. David told us that they started yelling at each other and there was pushing, physical grappling between the two.
Detectives learn John fired Quentin after only 1 week.
John was not an easy person to work for. And he could be difficult as a boss, he could be very demanding. He was not afraid to swing the axe. If you were not pulling your weight, John would drop you in a heartbeat.
There's always a possibility that someone could have been that upset at work and that they would take it to the level where they want this person dead. It could be that Parker pissed off the wrong individual.
Detectives have identified a man John Parker argued with days before his murder. Disgruntled former employee Quentin House.
To have someone very early in the investigation that may have had a beef with our victim was a terrific lead. Quentin House said the employees were required to make a certain amount of sales demonstrations to get paid. But Quentin said he was required to do more demos than he was initially told. He said, you know, I worked there a week and I was supposed to get $400 and I didn't. He had said that he refused to do these demos. And that's why they had words in the parking lot. Quentin House told us at the time of the murder that he was at his friend's house and that they were playing Xbox. He was forthcoming. He gave his friend's phone number. We definitely had to spend some time verifying his story to make sure that we had a very good picture of what happened that day. And it became evident to us that Quentin House was alibied and that we had to move on from him.
Police continue the search for leads in John Parker's business affairs.
We made it a point to talk to every active employee that was at J&J Parker at the time of the homicide.
What we ultimately determined was that there was a romantic relationship between the office manager and Judy.
What we were learning was that there were several employees that would either stop by work to check their schedule or would come in when there shouldn't have been anybody there, and Ben Love and Judy Parker were caught having sex by several different employees.
Obviously, Ben became a suspect. We didn't know if he was trying to get rid of John to be with Judy and possibly take over the business. So our investigation more focused in that direction.
They bring Ben Love in for a formal interview.
Ben was smooth, he was mildly charismatic.
Ben denied that there was any sort of romantic relationship between them.
He stated that he and Judy were great friends, that they worked very well together, that they were a great management team, and that he was, just like a member of the family.
But Ben's proximity to the murder was the problem. He acknowledges that he was there.
There was a great portion of that evening when he was the only one in the office. And the information that we had about what happened at that point came from Ben's mouth.
So you've either got Ben as the shooter, or you have an unknown third party that approached and committed the homicide. However, if Ben wasn't involved, he may possibly know about what occurred. We had to get him to break loose with any information that he had.
Under pressure, Love finally cracks and reveals an incident from a year earlier.
He said that Judy and John had brought her cousin, Tim Mendoza, up from Texas. Tim had some problems down there, and he was given the opportunity to turn his life around. Ben and Tim Mendoza became roommates.
But the Parkers' act of generosity seemingly came with strings attached.
Judy's daughter, Christina, had come to the apartment, and she had asked to have a private conversation with Tim. Tim went into the bedroom with her. After Christina left, Tim came out of the bedroom bewildered. He was depressed, he was sad, and he confided in Ben. He said that he was not brought to Indiana to turn his life around. Judy had used her influence on John to bring Tim up here so that Tim could kill John Parker. We've never seen anything like this. This is the stuff that they make up for TV.
That's what gave us the first inkling that the family was involved.
We confronted Judy with that plot. She said that Tim had seen John be mean to her, grab her by the arm, or call her names, and that Tim offered to kill John for her. She told him not to even think about it. And at the time, she dismissed it because Tim had left to go back to Texas. But Judy didn't mention Tim until we brought Tim up to her. And Judy's story changed throughout the course of our interviews. What we started, it was that she and John were in love and they were successful. Everybody liked him. But the more we talked to her and started asking pointed questions, then it came out that John had a temper and he became less of the saint that she was painting the picture of the very first night. In my 25 years of doing this, I've seen the emotional arc after someone's killed. We watched her and her body language and the things she said, and especially the things that she did when we weren't even in the room. It was a little different.
Detectives want to speak to the other family member involved in the alleged plot, Judy's daughter, Christina. But they quickly run into a problem.
Indiana state law states that if a parent is a suspect in a crime, that parent cannot give permission for law enforcement to talk to their children.
We were contacted by an attorney that indicated that he was representing the entire Parker family, and he was putting us on notice that we were not able to approach or talk to them anymore.
But police can investigate Tim Mendoza's whereabouts at the time of the murder.
What we'd gathered from law enforcement authorities down in Texas was that, in fact, Tim Mendoza was locked up at the time and wouldn't have been capable to be the shooter on that Thursday night.
As Mendoza is ruled out, detectives receive a curious new lead.
We had a phone call from a school resource officer in Crown Point, which is the next town south of us. He told us that he had some information for us.
There were two kids called Earl and Kevin. They were residents in a juvenile detention halfway house where they were allowed out if they had jobs in school, kind of reintegrate them into society. They came to the attention of the Crown Point Police Department because Earl was found to have $201 on his person. And one of the rules of the halfway house was you didn't get to have cash. Their story was that they were scamming this kid from school.
It was ultimately told to us that they had received that money from Judy's son, Daniel Hicks, to have John Parker killed.
Detectives now have 3 new suspects in the murder of John Parker: his stepson Daniel Hicks, and 2 of Daniel's friends, Kevin and Earl.
Danny Hicks is the second eldest of Judy's children. He did have his share of run-ins with law enforcement, with school officials. He's a bit of a wild child. We had felt at that time that we had a very large break in the case, that we had discovered a conspiracy to commit this murder. But we still don't have the trigger man that killed John Parker. So we needed to find further evidence, again, to corroborate the story.
The same state law that blocked an interview with Christina also bars their way to Danny. Their hope now lies in connecting Kevin and Earl to the murder.
When we talked to the individuals at the juvenile center, we were able to confirm that Kevin, in fact, was detained at the facility on the night of the shooting and would not have been involved in that particular homicide.
Detectives learned that Kevin's co-conspirator, Earl Dantzler, was already out on the night of the murder and has since vanished.
The timeline for us seemed to be similar to that of our homicide, which made us very suspicious. We had put out locates on him. Every person that had a snitch in every town was told to look for him. His picture was passed around. His name was thrown around. Earl was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time.
The hunt for Earl does, however, throw up a new lead.
We had a gentleman come to the police department and say that he had information that Mike Campion might be involved in the homicide. Mike Campion lived in the same neighborhood that Earl Dantzler lived in. I would say that he was locally infamous. People knew who Big Mike was. He was a local flap-about, for lack of a better word, didn't have a job, just kind of hung out and bummed cigarettes off people, you know, and just wreaked a little bit of havoc when he could. We found Mike's roommates, and they had said that Mike had come into some money, and that was unlike him. He was buying things, and he was spending money on other people. And again, this led us to believe that he might have been involved.
They finally track Campion down.
He told us that he had spoken to Earl pretty regularly before and after the homicide. And he alibied himself by saying that he had been arrested in February, but didn't get out till April 20th, which would have been 3 days after the homicide. What we learned by checking the arrest records through the jail was that he had been out since March.
With his blown alibi and connection to Earl, detectives must now determine how Mike Campion fits into the timeline of John Parker's murder.
No matter how confident you as a suspect are that you are not going to confess, you should check that belief at the door. My clients always tell me they're not going to talk to the police, but when the police hand me over the disclosure, I see a 2-hour confession. The police will break you down. They've got the skills and they've got the time.
His story initially was that he talked to Earl, and Earl told him that he was hired to kill John Parker. He changed that story into, well, I did talk to Earl about it, and then I went there in the car with him. So we pushed him on some details. Then he admitted to hiding behind the dumpster with Earl when Earl ran out to go shoot John. He had a voice stress test where he was found to not be truthful. So then we really pressed him on his involvement. During the middle of the conversation, he put his shoulders down and his head back and he said, I want to tell you guys this one thing, but if I tell you this one thing, I know I'm going to prison. At which point, Don and I exchanged a bit of a look, and we said, go ahead and tell us. So then he tells us that it wasn't Earl that ran up and shot John Parker, but that it was him.
We asked him to show us how you approached him. Show us where you shot him. And Mike indicated that he had approached John from behind. He had shot him in the head, and that he left the area.
So we get the confession. All this work, all these people that we'd looked at, and we had someone that actually admitted to being the trigger man. At that point, there's a certain amount of elation.
I made the decision to detain him and incarcerate him at the Lake County Jail.
But you can't just go to court with someone's confession. Anybody's statement can get thrown out at any time. A crime as big as homicide and murder, you have to be able to corroborate the story and prove that it's true.
To confirm Campion's story outright, they need to speak to Earl Dantzler.
We had sent out feelers and we had done searches on family members of Earl and his grandmother, Dolly Villagomez. and we learned that Dolly had moved to Las Vegas. We reached out to Las Vegas PD. They sent detectives over there, and the detectives verified that yes, Earl was living out there.
Investigators went to Las Vegas to find him and put together a timeline compared to the time of the murder.
Earl confirmed that Danny had hired him to kill John Parker. He confirmed the transfer of the money with Kevin. But he said that he and Kevin put this plan together that they were going to take this money and there was nobody to report this to. Because how do you report that somebody stole the money that you paid them to go kill somebody? They felt that it was a perfect scam. But then Earl said he and Dolly moved to Las Vegas, and that was the last he had heard. He put Indiana in his rearview mirror and didn't know anything that had happened until we showed up at his doorstep. We tried to confirm where he was for the homicide. He was nowhere near the state. He was 1,800 miles away, and there was no way that logistically we could put him in the timeline of events that led to the murder of John Parker.
This throws Mike Campion's involvement into question.
The largest hurdle that we had with Mike Campion's story were his repeated conversations with Earl Dantzler. I saw Earl at the store. I saw Earl walking down the street. He told me how to make some money. Earl was in Las Vegas the whole time. He was never here. That was too big of a hole in his story for us to consider Mike Campion a viable suspect. I don't know what his thought process was, but we came to believe that he would rather be infamous than nobody. So he put out there that he was the one that pulled the trigger. It was a great story to tell.
I've read about him, and you hear stories about false confessions. I had never had one. Looking back after that interview, that was a false confession.
It was frustrating. It was. But by this time in our investigation, frustration was a daily occurrence. Every day it was beating our head against the wall, just trying to make a little bit of progress. Our suspect pool in this case was so large, we found it beneficial to just start eliminating people that it couldn't have been. And eventually it came down to Judy, Danny, and Christina.
Detectives investigating the murder of John Parker are now convinced his own family are directly responsible, but have no evidence to prove it.
We felt that all the pieces of the puzzle was there. There's just one piece missing. Judy Parker, Daniel Hicks, Christina Hicks. We needed someone there to feel a little bit of pressure, maybe to talk.
It's very frustrating when you have information that you believe is very relevant to the point that you could solve this crime, this murder, but you're prevented from getting there through a set of circumstances. You can't go home and have sleepless nights over something like this. You have to keep thinking of a way to get around it. Keep working on the case.
With Judy's lawyer blocking any interviews with the family, detectives need to find another way to place the gun in one of their hands.
One of our ploys was a flyer that said we were looking for information involving a homicide that occurred in Maryville of John Parker. We must have handed out several thousand copies of this flyer. A short time later, we received information that 3 other students had actually been approached by Christina.
What we learned was that Christina was soliciting people she knew to see if they had a gun to sell. What we found out, she met a school friend in a parking lot of a local restaurant and had purchased a .25 automatic pistol. And this happened about a week and a half prior to the homicide. This was a huge break for us.
The prosecutor's office kept telling us, we want more. There's not quite enough. We want more.
We felt that it was necessary to serve a search warrant on the house. We showed up early one morning, knocked on the door. We woke them up out of bed. Everybody was in their PJs. It was a methodical, almost grid search of the house. But we didn't find the gun. To say it was a setback, it doesn't meet that standard. We were very upset. It let all the wind out of our sails.
It was frustrating to feel in our hearts with the interviews that we had and all this information surrounding Judy, Christina, and Danny that, hey, we want to charge.
Leads and new information were coming in less and less frequently. We learned that Judy and Ben had moved back up to Michigan. Danny had moved out to Arizona, and Christina had gotten married and was living locally.
We felt that we were so close that it could be solved, but we just needed somebody to break. You just have to keep chipping away at it, and hopefully something will break loose.
In February 2006, 3 years after the murder, detectives get an unexpected break from an unlikely source.
Christina's husband, Eric, had some run-ins with the law, drug-related.
So we picked him up, brought him to the station. I started leading into if Christina had ever talked to him or spoke to him about the murder of her stepfather, and he said she has. He didn't know a whole lot of great detail, but I gave Eric enough information in the interview to let him know that we knew what had happened. In his mind, he thought, oh, they're all caught. They're done. We asked him, I said, are you willing to go in and speak with Christine? He said, I'm willing to do anything to get out of this trouble for this drug warrant. He gets in his truck and he drove home. We followed behind. He goes up and started speaking with her. And he's telling her, you gotta speak to Detective Rice. He's a nice guy. He knows that you're involved. He knows that their mom's involved. You need to go in and talk to him. And she starts crying. She goes, okay, I'm ready. I want to go in and talk to him. I do.
Detectives have finally broken through to one of the conspirators in the murder of John Parker. His stepdaughter, Christina.
She told us, Judy planned this out and sold everyone on this plan. Judy had a game plan for her riches. She had a game plan for how she was going to get it.
Christina admits that John was killed for his $1 million life insurance policy.
Judy was able to convince everyone that once the insurance paid out, she was going to take care of everyone.
And Judy kept telling them, we'll all get basically a piece of the pie. She didn't care about anything but that money. During the interview with Christina, she gave detail how her mother gave her money to go purchase the gun that actually was used to kill John Parker. And she said that Danny was the person that shot and killed John. And Judy forced him to do this. It was disturbing to know that Judy was setting up her own children to kill her husband because she couldn't find anybody else to do it.
When we approached Danny out in Arizona, I made the statement to him that, you remember me, I'm Detective Toth from Maryville. We just talked to Christina yesterday, and she gave us everything. And I think it's time for you to come clean and talk to us about why it happened. And at that point in time, he started crying and said, yeah, I'll tell you everything.
Danny was just overwhelmed with the stress and the emotion that he'd been holding in for all these years. And he admitted that it was him.
Christina and Danny's confessions, along with a detailed timeline, give detectives a clear picture of John Parker's final hours.
John spent most of the day with his brother. That night, probably at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, John and Judy had gone out to dinner. They dined at a local restaurant. Before they left the restaurant, Judy had made a phone call to home and spoke to Christina.
Judy called home because Danny needed a head start. He needed to be at the business waiting for John.
Christina gives Danny the keys to her car. He's not even old enough to drive. Takes her car, drives it all the way into Maryville, parks at a local business, and walks up and hides behind a dumpster.
At approximately 9 to 9:15, John and Judy traveled to the office. They went in, spoke to the manager, and came out.
Danny walked up behind John. And shot him in the back of the head.
You have to put a lot of blame on Judy because Judy was the adult. I think Judy convinced the two teenagers, whether it be by greed or ignorance.
Judy Parker, Daniel Hicks, and Christina Hicks are arrested and charged with murder.
Christina got assisting of criminal charges, and she got the least sentence. Danny got sentenced to 23 years, and Judy got 33 years for orchestrating the actual homicide itself. It is a tragedy. John fell in love with this lady. He took her kids in. He made them part of his family. They were all going to reap the benefits of his hard work. John was ambushed. Cut down in his prime. Nobody deserves that.
It saddens me that something so silly as money would make them want to do that. But greed was probably one of the first evils, you know. What's the Bible say? The love of money is the root of all evil.
There's no doubt in my mind that she brainwashed Danny and influenced him into killing her husband. I kept thinking back and looking at that mug photo, and I'm seeing this little boy. I felt for him that His mother made him do this. She's an evil person to make her own child do something so evil.